Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the top 10 Eldar units after the September balanced data slate. So a lot has changed. A lot of the top 10 units are now probably more mid-tier units, if not unusable. So there's a couple of, units that I think got hit really hard and probably won't recover. And some of you might disagree, but I think the support weapon platform, the D cannon, is much worse. I think it's basically a very niche pick in certain army comps now, and I don't think it's an auto-include by any means. I also think that the Autarch Wayleaper might not be an auto-include anymore just because it's so many points. And because basically they were using 3 fire prisms. Fire prisms have increased considerably by 30 points a model, so that's going to be a 90-point gain plus the 35-point gain of the Autarch. If you put that together, that is a lot of points that you are spending for that combination. So I think people may switch to a foot Autarch and just, hide it. Towering's not a big deal anymore. It doesn't ignore line of sight. So you only have to really deal with indirect fire and basically just hope it survives or pay the extra points for Phoenix Gem, which you probably won't do because at that point you might as well just go with the Wayleaper anyway. So yeah, it's kind of a weird state of affairs. The Fire Prism is still really good, The Wayleaper is still good, still effective, but they're just not as effective and points efficient as they once were. And the resource cost of Fire Prisms went way up. So just to let you guys know, typically you spend 5 command points on Phantasm for 5 turns. That is now going to be 10 command points that you have to spend to keep your prisms safe. Now, a lot of you will still do that, and that's great because, Fire Prisms are still awesome. But I think there's some new kids on the block that want to say hello. So we're going to go ahead and go through and, in my opinion, tell you guys what I think are the best units in the index after the September balanced data slate. And the good news is we're still a very strong army. I said here that we're OP. We're not OP, I don't think, anymore, but we're certainly still strong. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. But first, a quick overview of what we're going to look at today. In our video, we're going to be doing a ranking of the top 10 Eldar units from the Eldar Index and analyze them post-September nerf. Okay, so starting off at Shroud Runners. Shroud Runners coming in at number 10 because they are extremely fast. They have a 9-inch scout move, which helps them control the board a little bit early on in the game and get better positions. They can also score well on objectives. Because they have pistols and assault weapons, they can obviously advance and still score, and have solid anti-horde. They come with 3 scatter lasers, and also the rifles don't hurt. They're only 80 points as well, so they're pretty cost-effective damage for what you get, and they boost the damage of other strong units with target acquisition, granting lethal hits. So this is a bonus that improves a lot of units in our army, but namely some of the strongest units in this list, which I will go over. And one of the reasons why I think as a support unit, they're going to be really strong going forward into this edition. Or at least this balanced data slate. So Dire Avengers are next. They come in at number 9. Now, I didn't have these guys on the last one because I just thought that, with Wraith Knight Supremacy and D cannons and all that kind of stuff, Dire Avengers fell by the wayside just a little bit. They seem to occupy a similar role in, Overwatch defense and board control as the D cannon, as the Wraith Knight and things like that. However, because the Wraith Knight has been basically nerfed to the ground, can't Overwatch anymore, and can't see over ruins and things like that, these guys are going to come into the picture as a unit that can do extremely good shooting with lethal hits for increased damage versus tougher targets. They have excellent Overwatch. They do it on 4+ when controlling an objective, and they can do it for free with the Zerman. Especially, again, like I said earlier, with the Wraith Knight out of the picture. And they're very cost efficient. They're only 14 points a model. It's 140 for a unit of these. They can chip wounds off of bigger stuff like tanks and monsters, and they can also shred infantry, especially the tougher infantry that you'll see in most games, Orc Boys, Leagues of Votann, things like that. Things that have a higher toughness, but maybe not so much armor. So these guys are pretty good. They're solid. I thought they were very solid. I thought they were an A-tier unit before the nerf, and now I think they're probably top dogs in their category of board control. And I think you'll see a lot of people pivoting into Dire Avengers for their anti-infantry needs. Warwalkers come in at number 8. Now, I know Warwalkers got a pretty significant nerf, a 15-point nerf, which I didn't think was really that necessary, but I guess with the Bright Lance platforms, they are very efficient. They're still pretty tough. They have -1 to wound and a 4+ invul, so it can survive a few big hits. This is needed because you can't phantasm these anymore. So you're going to need something that can actually, come out of cover, shoot something, and then have a possibility or a chance to survive. And I think the Warwalker does this really well. The Viper, once it pops out of cover, removes an enemy cover, and, shoots its Bright Lance, it's probably going to be mincemeat, right? Because of the fact it has no invul, it doesn't have a -1 to wound, it's very, squishy. It's going to be killed. The Warwalker actually has a chance to survive, and that's what makes it valuable. Especially in a world where we're going to have to be spending 2 command points for Fire and Fade, and we're probably not going to be wanting to use it on a Warwalker. With the Bright Lances, it has great anti-large. You can use Fate dice to boost those damage rolls up to a 6, so that you'll get 8 damage out of them, which is pretty effective. It also can scout. So it can scout 9 inches and zone out other enemy infiltrators and scouts. And lastly, you guys might think I'm crazy for this, but I actually think it's a decent speed bump for basically blocking off infantry from getting into your back lines. So if you see a fast-moving infantry squad or maybe a cheap chaff squad that's trying to sneak around, you don't have the tools to deal with it. You can always use this thing to provide a little bit of a speed bump, prevent them from getting on objectives and things like that. So in a pinch, it can also do that fairly effectively. All right, we have number 7, Ilic Night Spear. So Ilic Night Spear, I think, was kind of overshadowed before the nerf just because of the fact that we had so many great lone operatives before. He kind of just blended into the background a little bit. I still thought he was very powerful. A lot of Eldar players realized his value, but he is now the cheapest lone operative, and I use that in quotes because he's not technically a lone operative, but he kind of acts like one in the index, and he confers this ability to the Rangers he leads. So essentially, they get lone operative as well. He's a decent character assassin. He has a great, semi-great weapon himself that can be used to deal some mortal wounds to an enemy character, but he gives his ranger unit a damage boost as well with rerolls to wounds. So if you put him in a ranger squad, they're definitely going to be taking out characters left and right. And again, they're really not that bad at just dealing with enemy infantry with those rerolls to wound. Yeah, their AP is a little bit low, but if you have a big squad of them up perched on, the top of a ruin or something like that, gaining plunging fire, they can do significant damage. So yeah, I really like Ilic Night Spear. I think with the loss of things like the Wraith Knight and obviously the D cannons and stuff like that, you're going to see more people leaning into this to, capture objectives, secure areas of the board, and obviously take out characters. We don't have something that can just roll entire infantry squads anymore. So support characters that, buff up a squad are going to be more important. So we're going to need something to take out those support characters, and Ilic is pretty much the perfect answer to that. So next up we have the Falcon. Now the Falcon, I think, was probably not on this list before just because there were so many cheaper and better anti-tank platforms for the cost. You had things like fire prisms only costing $150, so it was kind of a hard sell to sell a Falcon when you could just, for 10 more points, get a prism for your anti-tank needs. However, prisms are 180 points now. Falcons are only 140. And they come with great firepower. They have a pulse laser, which has strength 9, AP -2, D6 damage, which is fairly effective against lighter vehicles and monsters. And you can give it a Bright Lance as well, which is also very good against large targets. It can deep strike for better angles and boost the damage of the infantry inside, so if you have fire dragons in there or even a Warlock Conclave. I know that sounds nuts to some of you guys, but the Warlock Conclave is actually pretty good at this thing. They can shoot their Destructors off as well as their Singing Spears and get some significant damage, and the Farseer inside can also benefit with Eldritch Storm. So it is a little bit expensive, especially with the Farseer increase, but it is a good kind of a package for killing infantry. It is also very fast and maneuverable. And something you cannot underestimate is that this thing has a very big threat range. So if you have fire dragons in this thing, you can move forward 14 inches. You can dump the fire dragons out 3 inches. That's effectively a 17-inch move for the fire dragons. Then they can shoot their 12 inches. If they're within 6 inches, they get that bonus melta damage. So they can actually, make fire dragons really effective anti-tank, which in my opinion is a pretty good replacement for the anti-tank we lost via the Wraith Knight. So the Wraith Knight was basically anti-everything, but now since we don't have access to that as easily, a maneuverable model that can get models into a close position to do extreme damage very quickly and then quickly maneuver out of line of sight with Phantasm is a great bonus. So again, moving this thing forward or deep striking it, shooting with your fire dragons, and then backing off with a Phantasm out of line of sight could be a very good way to get some quick damage in on an enemy for a cheaper cost. All right, so coming in at number 5, we have the Death Jester. So I think the Death Jester is still very good, even with the nerfs. It's still extremely cost-effective anti-infantry damage with Fate's Messenger. You do need to give it Fate's Messenger now. Taking it by itself is completely worthless. It's too many points for that. But if you give it Fate's Messenger, it's actually still very effective. It can hit characters pretty hard as well, which is going to be needed in this edition, especially since there's no more Wraith Knight, so there's no more annihilating whole units. You're going to need another way to deal with those characters in those squads. Also, Lone Operative just makes him very hard to target. So Death Jester is still extremely effective. Lone Operatives are still extremely powerful. And even with a 20-point nerf, with Fate's Messenger, I think this guy is tops. Coming in at number 4, we have Warp Spiders. So Warp Spiders are a unit that has basically just gotten a small points nerf. Other than that, they're exactly the same. And guess what? I think they're even better now. Because now they ignore abilities that give a feel no pain versus mortal wounds. So those Custode armies that were giving these guys trouble, basically even with their devastating wounds, are getting 4 up. Feel no pains against them, they're not going to get them anymore because of the change in the devastating wounds rule. So now instead of dealing mortal wounds, it just ignores armor and invuls. So this increases their damage against those targets. They're also extremely fast and good at objective play. Being able to move 24 inches in a movement phase and get out of line of sight is a great way to reduce the amount of overwatch that's coming at you, and we're going to have a greater need for good anti-infantry units. So taking 1 or 2 squads of these to kind of cover for the lack of a Wraith Knight or the lack of, mortal wound spam that we could do before with D-weaponry is going to be very needed. And Warp Spiders fill that niche very well, even at 115 points for 5. Coming in at number 3, we have Shadow Specters. So Shadow Specters, I think, are a little bit better than Spiders in terms of damage. And I just think this is the case, right? They're more of a damage-dealing unit. And maybe they're a little bit less good at objective play. But they're still pretty good at it. They have great damage. They can either fire a Disperse shot, which has Blast. They didn't take that away, so you can still do massive damage against hordes. And they have great damage against Terminator equivalents as well with a Damage 3, Strength 6, AP2 shot. So that'll bring most Terminators right to their invul save. And of course, you could remove that Terminator unit's cover as well with a Viper. They're fast, and they can deep strike. Deep strike is very good on these guys. If you're afraid of indirect fire, you can just put them in deep strike and have them come in on turn 2 and keep them safe for a couple of turns until those indirect fire weapons are dealt with. They can move, shoot, move, giving them protection against shooting and greater objective play. Again, you can deep strike with these guys and then move, shoot, move right after that, which gives you even more flexibility. And they have lots of synergy with buffs like Guide or Target Acquisition. So that Ranger ability, that Shroud Runner ability I told you guys about earlier, Target Acquisition giving lethal hits, this is insane with these guys. You mark an Orc Boy squad, you mark a Leagues of Votann unit or something like that, you have these guys shoot with their blast weapons, and that unit is going to be erased from the table. It is very effective. It's almost criminal the amount of damage you can do to those squads. And I'm not even getting into the Imperial Guard blobs of 25 men, which you'll be getting D6 plus 5 attacks with each Shadow Specter against those types of units. If you mark the target, you're getting lethal hits. If you guide, you're rerolling your hit rolls, and you're wounding on 3s because guardsmen are very squishy. So it's actually criminal the amount of damage these guys can pull off. And then after they're dealing that damage, they can just slip right back behind cover. There's also nothing stopping them from using Phantasm. So you can use Phantasm on these guys, obviously, because they are infantry, even though, you probably won't need it. All right, coming in at number 2, we have the Night Spinner. So the Night Spinner, I think, is probably one of the biggest low-key winners of this change. And the reason why is because we still need indirect fire in our army, right? We still need something that's able to fire out a line of sight effectively against infantry, clear infantry off objectives in the backfield, and also provide utility. And this thing does it all. It gives you an unmatched board control, reducing enemy movement and preventing advances, which is great at protecting vulnerable units, but it's also good at stopping units from getting onto objectives. So this, in and of itself, wins games for you. And let me just repeat that. If you're going against a slow army that needs advance rolls and needs their movement to get on objectives early so they can score on objectives and score points, this model will win you the game. Pure and simple. A lot of people were saying they were going to nerf this thing's ability and stuff like that and make it so that people could still advance. That didn't happen. So basically, you can fire this thing off at a target, reduce its movement by 2 inches, and prevent it from advancing, thus preventing it from getting onto objectives, getting line of sight on your units, and things like that. It's invaluable. And I would say it probably has a place in almost every competitive list. It's just so good. I actually feel bad using it sometimes. I played my Leagues of Votann buddy the other day. He busted out the army to try it out after the new balance changes. I had one of these things in the list, and I just felt bad because his units were moving so slowly they could not get to the objectives in time. And unfortunately, it just, cost him so many primary points at the end of the game. And I really have to tell you guys, this is a great unit. If you're thinking of something to replace a Wraith Knight, and you need some indirect fire in your army, this is your guy. This is your vehicle. Take it in your list. You won't regret it. The other alternative is 2 units of Dark Reapers because of the Tempest Launcher. Now, that is a good alternative as well. It's a little more front-loaded on damage, but it doesn't have that utility that the Night Spinner has. So I think, for the most part, the Night Spinner is going to be the better pick overall, because it has that utility, but Dark Reapers are still pretty good if you just need indirect fire damage. All right, before we talk about what got in first, the best unit in my opinion in the index, we're going to look at some honorable mentions. Now, I couldn't fit all the good units in this top 10 list, obviously, but there are some that were highly considered. The Yin Karn is still very powerful. It did get a very hefty nerf, though, and I think that it's going to be more of a niche pick. You're going to have to build your army around it, versus just slotting it into anything, right? You can't just pick up anything and use the Yin Karn now. You really have to plan your army effectively to make the best use out of it, but it is still very good. The Viper and the Hornet are really solid picks. The Hornet almost made it onto this list easily because it has 2 Bright Lances. It's basically the cheapest way you can get 2 Bright Lances in the Eldar Index now. And the Viper can remove cover, increasing damage for your army. So those are both very good. Farseers are still basically an auto-include in some way, shape, or form. They have fate dice manipulation and buffs that are very effective. They are a bit more expensive though, so, you do have to keep that in mind. The Solitaire is also very good. It has great killing power and it's extremely fast. It can get to targets easily and take them out pretty quickly. Fire Dragons and Dark Reapers are also very cost-effective damage versus their intended targets. And again, I almost picked these units up and put them in the list, but I'm a little bit biased towards them. I really like Aspect Warriors. Biel-Tan was my first army, basically. So I was afraid I was being a little bit biased with these units, but Fire Dragons and Dark Reapers are still solid picks, and I think Fire Dragons and possibly Dark Reapers are going to see their way into competitive lists soon. Dark Reapers, maybe not so much, but definitely Fire Dragons, I think. Striking Scorpions and Swooping Hawks are also great for their cost, and they have great board control and utility. All right, now that we've talked about the honorable mentions, let us go ahead and commence the countdown to the best unit in the Codex. 3, 2, 1. Of course, it's the Avatar of Khaine. Now, some of you may disagree with me on that and say, you know what, the Avatar of Khaine is good, but I don't know if it's the best. Now, for those of you thinking that, just keep this in mind. With the nerf of the Wraith Knight, the Avatar of Khaine is now the toughest unit in the index. And it was pretty much tougher than the Wraith Knight anyway. But the thing about the Wraith Knight was that it was also able to exert a massive amount of board control. It could overwatch effectively, and it could basically shoot anything it wanted within 36 inches. The Avatar of Khaine is a short-ranged model, but it has always been tougher than the Wraith Knight. It has a 4+ invul save and it halves all damage. It's pretty insane. It also has an insane range attack with massive damage and sustained hits D3, it just lacks the range that the Wraith Knight had. But now since the Wraith Knight has been nerfed, the Avatar of Khaine is in a great position to be one of the perfect recipients for Fate Dice. And in addition to that, something it has over the Wraith Knight is it can smash just about anything in close combat. The Wraith Knight with the twin Wraith Cannons just could not deal that much damage in close combat. You usually kept it in the back, shooting all game, and that's about it. You didn't actually want it in close combat. And typically there was no army that could realistically get into close combat effectively with the Wraith Knight anyway, but I digress. The Avatar of Khaine not only is tougher than a Wraith Knight, is a great recipient for Fate Dice, has great combat potential unlike the Wraith Knight had, but it also has more reliable charges and advanced rolls for himself and nearby units. The Avatar of Khaine is actually quite fast, especially with Fate Dice support. In a single turn, with an advance roll, you can move 17 inches with the Avatar of Khaine on turn 1. So you can get to that objective, you can hold that objective down until your units can support you, and you can still give this guy fortune. He's actually, again, tougher than a Wraith Knight. He can take more punishment, so he might be able to survive a couple of turns on a key objective so that the rest of your army can do its thing. I have actually enjoyed running this guy on the flank of a battlefield, running him up, casting fortune on him, and essentially making him impossible to move. The rest of my army takes up position so that if my opponent wants to actually kill the Avatar of Khaine, they're going to take a lot of damage back in return. As the Avatar is a very imposing model, you can't just ignore the Avatar of Khaine. It has a really big threat range. So a lot of people don't realize this, but not only do you get +1 on advance rolls, but you also get +1 on charge rolls, which means the Avatar of Khaine has a really big threat range. You can move 10 inches and basically charge an average of 8 inches, which gives you an effective threat range for charges of 19 inches. And that's not even counting Fate Dice, right? We could use a Fate Dice of a 6 to substitute one of the charge rolls and then roll the other dice, and we're getting much higher results after that. The Avatar of Khaine is a really powerful model that cannot be ignored. Not only is he tougher than the Wraith Knight, has insane damage, but also makes great use of Fate Dice. So yeah, I think the Avatar of Khaine is easily, even with the point hike that he got, I think he's going to be the best unit in the entire index. Now, that's just my take. I could be wrong. We'll see. But he was already being used before, and I think with the loss of the Wraith Knight, he's going to be leaned on even more going forward. So, one last thing before I go about this guy, because I do want to mention this. I haven't mentioned this about him, but I kind of mentioned it a little bit in the video I did of the Avatar of Khaine about a week ago. But the Avatar of Khaine also has a little bit of a dirty trick. When you overwatch with this guy, and you overwatch with a Fate Dice of a 6, that will automatically proc sustained hits D3. So, if there's any large monsters, or knights, or anything of the like that can kill this guy in close combat, you overwatch that target, you're getting D3 +1, strength 16, AP -4, damage D6 +2, attacks. By the way, rerolling 1 wound because of unparalleled foresight. And there you go. Most likely, you're either going to take that target out or you're going to do enough damage to it to ensure that when you strike in close combat after they get their attacks, they're going to be brought down. Most characters, even monsters, by the way, can't one-round the Avatar of Khaine. It's just too hard. He halves all damage, he has a 4+ invulnerable save. It's just very rare for any monster in combat or vehicle in combat to be able to do that. With the exception of a few combat-oriented Chaos Knights, perhaps, and stuff like that with buffs, but that's usually a rarity. You probably won't see that all too often. Alright, so in conclusion, a lot has changed in the meta since the balanced data slate, and I'm really happy for it. It's looking like a lot of new units are going to be seeing more competitive play that never truly had an opportunity to shine before now, despite still being very good. And I always thought there was a lot of great units in the index, things like Dire Avengers, Dark Reapers, Swooping Hawks. I always said that they were great units. I still think they're great units. They were just being outshined by the most OP stuff in competitive play. And just to give you guys an example, I mean, Swooping Hawks are a perfect example, right? Swooping Hawks are a very good objective unit. But if you were playing an Eldar army in a competitive scene before the balanced data slate, you really didn't need Swooping Hawks because your opponent's army would probably be dead. So you were essentially just scoring as much as you could with what you had. You know, you had a squad of Shadow Specters, a squad of Warp Spiders, and that was mostly enough to cover your objectives. You'd keep those alive, your Wraith Knight would just basically destroy everything, and that'd be it. But now, because that's gone, people are going to have to start thinking more about objective play and things like that. Swooping Hawks are going to be coming into probably a couple lists here and there. Dire Avengers might be slotted in to give some board control and anti-infantry power. Dark Reapers might even be slotted in to give a little bit of anti-infantry and also maybe some indirect fire. And even Fire Dragons coming out of a Falcon look to be a very cost-effective replacement for the anti-tank we lost with the D-Cannons and, of course, the Wraith Knight. Alright everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Please tell me in the comments if you agree or disagree with any of my top picks. I'd love to hear your opinions on it. And once again, thank you so much for watching. To all my Patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last months, thank you once again. You've made the channel grow considerably and made it better. If you do want to become a Patreon member, we have free trials activated to support the channel. It gives you unlimited access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar enthusiasts and players who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will go ahead and leave the link for that in the video description. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon or want to grab some Eldar inspired apparel to rep your local game store, you can go ahead and check out those links in the description as well. Alright everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Have a great one. Have some great games this weekend, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.